Welcome back to the VET S.O.S podcast. Here, sitting on the stoop, we're about to get the scoop. And remember, here at the VET S.O.S podcast, we have this one saying, you don't have to drown in the sea of transition. Grab that VET S.O.S Lifeline. Once you hear this information, like, subscribe, and share. But today on the scoop, we're going to be sitting down, having a great conversation on the stoop. We're going to explore the intersection of innovation, resilience, and redefining ability. Our guest we have today, I got a good one. My man, Doug. He's a West Point graduate, a disabled Army veteran, inventor, entrepreneur who challenges the way we think about disability, creativity, and the human potential. After facing physical limitations of his own, Doug didn't accept the traditional narrative of disability. Instead, he created something new. From inventing the adaptive noodle kitchen knife, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, to developing the concept of ability curve, Doug is helping people rethink how we approach aging, disability, and the human capability. This is a conversation about innovation. How are we going to innovate ourselves? How are we going to keep moving forward? Leadership and discovery that sometimes the very thing we think that limit us are actually what unlock our greatest ideas. And he has two of them and plenty more. So let's dive in. What's going on today, brother? How we doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you, my friend. I'm glad we hit record. You and I were doing the whole show in the green room.
Yeah.
And now we can talk and help out some other people. So thank you so much.
Oh, man. Hey, I appreciate you coming on. I know you came on the other show to talk about your knife and what all you doing on that. But people sit down on the stoop. They want to hear the scoop on Doug. Like, who is Doug before we dive into the conversation that what we had all up in the green room about disability comes in many shapes, sizes, and forms, but you don't have to discount yourself because that is like a superpower, right? You know, and right. You definitely have one of those superpowers that you said that's been locked in with you, but you use it for your ability to show people that if you have something, you could use it for good. So who's Doug?
Well, thank you, man. That's quite an introduction. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah. Oh, so you asked who is Doug?
Yes, yeah. Who is Doug? What's the scoop on you, brother? Like who is Doug?
I like being on veteran shows because then it's like I'm hard of hearing, right? And they're like, oh yeah, he was in the artillery, so it totally makes sense. So it's an interesting question, and I like I love the vibe of your show, and I think it's the answer to that is I didn't really know until really, I don't know, 3-4 years ago when I started doing this and in the invention space, in the entrepreneurial space. And I think that's a big part of everyone's journey, right? You can't be successful in anything unless you know who you are. And so now I'm in entrepreneurial pursuits. I like inventing. I like physical products. Previously, I had convinced myself that I wasn't mechanical, right? I was in more of the service industries. And it's interesting, when you talk about innovation, it's really about problem solving and thinking through like, well, how's a novel way to solve an issue that I'm having? And that created a really interesting through line for me when I figured that out. And I was like, oh, I'm always thinking about optimization and I'm always thinking about that stuff. And veterans, especially, I think it's either inherent in that population or it's the profession of arms is a profession that brings in problem solvers. But I think that's what I landed on, and very much that I need to be somewhere autonomous. I need to be somewhere where you can allow that to bloom. So it's very interesting, and I would say honestly, I don't necessarily know who I am yet. Right? I think it changes a lot, like what you were talking about, how I've taken a different view on disability and how it's a curve and how it's a lifetime thing. I think you can kind of always know what guides you, but who you are at any given time can change, and that's okay. And it's good to accept it. I think when you talk about transition, and I know that's a big part of it, who you are can't always be that identity, right? Because I was only in, if you count West Point 9 years, you were in for 25. That's an identity. And that when that changes, that shouldn't change necessarily who you are in terms of your value system and your character and all that, but it might change what people see. and all of that.
Right. That's who shot. I told you. So I did a shot under, but over 2 decades. But I know when I came in the service and I left the service, and when I went back home, Doug, I thought I could pick up where I left off, and I had 2 decades of life,
Right.
right? Life that happened, but here I am. I'm trying to go back to where I came from, acting where I was, and like you said, that growth period. What more I learned, and I had to rethink of who am I now?
Right.
Who's
Right.
Kings? Who's Doug? Like you said, I'm still trying to. You said I'm still trying to figure myself
Right.
out.
I think it's interesting when you were talking, it made me think about, like, for me, it was the opposite because I was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, which answered a lot of questions. But the military was like water to a fish. It was high uncertainty, quick decision making, novel experiences, the requirement to go deep really quick on some things and shift, have 6 conversations, right? Like I was a fire support officer. You're on 5 radios at a time. Well, someone with ADHD can have 5 conversations. So I,
Right.
I, I performed well in the Army. I got out. Everybody told me it would be the same way. It wasn't. And and I should say it wasn't in corporate America. And so I tried to move into that skin, and there was just not enough risk, not enough uncertainty. All these large companies are trying to limit that either through regulatory capture or whatever they can do. They're not about rapid movement and the way a battlefield would work. So it took me being in a situation where the business I was most recently in, which is lending, and I still do a little bit of it. I keep my license going, but that kind of sunsetted. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'll be an entrepreneur. I had the formula at that time of, okay, I had a need. I created a product around it. Other people saw value in it. But all of a sudden I was thrust in the middle of this thing. And I was like, oh, that's what I liked about that job. So I think finding yourself is sometimes looking like, when were you happiest? And don't let money
Mm,
or other people's opinion drive that. You have to make money doing it, but maybe it's not the job itself, it's the components of it that work with your wiring to then say, okay, that's where I need to be, and then
wow.
building around that. And I think for me, there was a 25-year period when I got out of the Army where I looked and said, oh, I need to recreate what I had there because I liked it a heck of a lot more than I thought I did.
Wow. And to when did you begin to rethink the concept of disability, right? Because you said that you was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and you like, ah, man, so that's the reason I like to do multiple things at the same
Right,
time. I
right,
was
right.
I was good at it. So what made you like you start to rethink the concept of disability? 'Cause we had that conversation before we hit the record button, like, it's it comes in different sizes, shapes, forms, like,
Yeah.
like, is it physical? Is it mental? Is it a combination? Is it a hybrid? Like, what made you rethink the concept?
It was actually, I was going through an accelerator for my business, a military one, a great military accelerator called or veteran called IVMF, the Institute for Veteran and Military Families. And we kept trying to define what the addressable market was. So I sort of backed into it out of necessity, not relating to myself, but I started using, and this is where when people are talking about I think that they need to understand, because I'm going somewhere with this, they need to understand that it's an ideation partner. You sort of have to know your right answer versus it giving you the answer. But I was able to really let my mind go and say, well, wait a minute. Are we answering the right question? And it took me back to my Army days a little bit to say ability and disability are potentially binary, but only on the task level. It's not an identity. We talked a little bit about identities, and people want to shoehorn it into an identity on either side potentially, but most of the time it's on the side of the
Right,
non-disabled who want to say it's black or white. And I'm talking
right,
cognitive, emotional, like it comes in a lot of shape and sizes. But when I looked at it from, okay, if you look at it as a task or an array of tasks to do a particular job, and you're thinking in terms, okay, what task under what conditions and what standards, it becomes more of a scale, like how degraded are you? And I know that that's not novel, but looking at then over a lifetime to be able to look and say, okay, if we're talking about how big the market is, we have to capture everybody, because otherwise everybody says, oh, disabled, that's a niche. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I believe age is a chronic condition. And,
Right.
when
We
you're,
talked about
even
that.
when you're young, if you're a child doing an adult task, you're functionally disabled to do that task. You're not disabled for your age potentially, and some people might be, but you literally do not have the strength, knowledge, coordination, dexterity, whatever to do
Right.
that task. So when you start looking at that way, it is a curve. And when we started doing that and not thinking about MS or Parkinson's or arthritis or all that, it's a matter of who can't grip things. That's when we started to look and say, okay, it's, potentially 150 million people or more when you look and say age being a chronic condition.
Right.
So it was out of necessity, but that got me thinking more to say, well, wait a minute, that solves my problem for the knife. And if I'm doing a pitch, at one point we were trying to raise money, and a lot of that is based on how big a market can you serve, right? Because someone's investing, they want to know how their money's going to get back to them. But that's when I start to look and say, there's a message here. There's a lesson for leadership in corporations, um, individuals who have disabilities, parents, everybody to look and say, okay, we're all going to get there. We need to start thinking about this differently, because the difference between me and somebody who doesn't have, let's say, limb issues, right? Like I have upper body and lower body issues to some degree. Me and the difference between that person is either an accident, a diagnosis, or a couple of decades. Everybody's getting there. And I would liken it most to the person who doesn't have the donor thing checked on their card, but wants a kidney when they need it. Everybody has to think in terms of, I will need these some days. So we need to start thinking of physical products and understanding and empathy and everything around it, because we're all going to be impacted by it. And that really is what
Wow.
drove just this different perspective on it, and saying we got to be more together on doing this stuff.
Wow. So was that the time when that kind of sparked the idea to develop the ability curve?
Well,
Is that
it
way, like,
was,
I'm gonna come up with this trademark, right? Because you trademark that. I've seen it on the
yeah, well,
websites
yeah,
and
it's like, well, it
yeah.
was more, again, it was more desperation, right? Because you might be doing pitches with other people and they're like, my market is this big. And you'll pitch it, we pitched the knife early. And I think one of the mentors was, this was a different pitch competition, but they said, there's no way the market could be that big. And you have to have something in your back pocket to say, if you layer it and strip out comorbidities and make a conservative approach. What we found too was interesting. The ability curve, we only started with upper body. So
Oh wow.
if you were even to look back, because that was my own issues, right?
Right.
Right before my shoulder got rebuilt, that's when I designed the knife, because I like to cook. I like to own my nutrition. I couldn't cook because my shoulder was shot. I couldn't swing a hammer because I make knives as a hobby. So I'm like, all right. And there was a circular saw blade. And I play around with, like, things like that to experiment and prototype. So I prototyped it and it just sort of went from there. But so we were only looking at the upper body extremity issues. We unveiled it at an abilities expo in last June. We did a Kickstarter, and then that was our first event. And we sold more knives to people who were in wheelchairs or part of the time or fully, and who were vision impaired. Um, the upper body ones were a little bit tougher, because actually some of them, if it's bilateral, had an issue with keeping the food where it needed to be. But if you're in a wheelchair, you can hold the food and you have to cut. And many of them identified to me a way to use it I hadn't thought of before. So that's when we
Wow.
even went further and said, oh, this ability curve concept is even better, because it really encapsulates all the different disabilities people can have. And it gives you an ability to understand really what I designed it for in many ways was is it something I can bring to other companies to learn how to engage the disabled space, to say it's bigger than you think. Right now, I'm even trying to reach out to um, media outlets that review items and saying, why don't you have an ability or an adaptive rating when you review any product? Or why don't you specifically do it more mainstream? Why does this always have to be sort of a parking lot item for everybody? So originally it was about saying, well, wait a minute here. There's this huge community of people who are really being ignored, who are, you know, if you look at boomers who are pretty much all disabled in some way now, I would say,
Right.
just from age. Their grip
Smate.
is going, right. They could still use a regular knife, but their grip is starting to go and things like that. So that was the original part of it, where I'm trying to go, because I'm launching some keynotes and trying to share the methodologies to say, this is a better way of looking at things. And if you can conceptualize your own curve, then when you see somebody whose curve is different, but who represents where you may end up, it's a little bit easier to understand that. And I also had the advantage of, I was a caretaker at that time. My father was living with us. He passed at 89. So he was up there, and he had always liked to cook. So he helped some of the time with trying out different variations. I have the Nulu Museum in my garage of different ones that we had come up with.
Hey,
But
those knives
so
on
that
the
was another
website,
part,
they
and
look
that's where I was like,
nice.
oh, age, that's part of it as well.
Yeah, no, I said I took a look at the website. Those knives are nice. I was like, well, I haven't thought about how you have it like a rocker,
Yep.
to make even peeling or cutting an orange. Like I seen that on there. Like I say, wow, that's and it goes out past the community, right? So that's part of the innovation and design that we was talking about earlier, right? So what makes that adaptive design so powerful, right? Because like you just said, you said people seen it and then like, wow, I could use it for this. I could use it for that. I didn't even know I could use it.
Right.
Like that innovation and design. Like,
Yeah.
so what makes it so powerful, that
Let
adaptive
me grab
design so
something for you.
powerful?
I keep knives all around my office down here. So this is a traditional knife, and it's a linear design. And I go back and forth on how I address this, but there's a visceral attachment to this, especially, military guys, all of it, right? Where
Right.
this is, every culture has one, and it's aligned perfectly like this, right? So if you're thinking, where does it align with my muscular skeletal structure for the best force transfer? It's for stabbing, which makes sense. Hunting, defense, war. This would have been the one tool that you would need to carry. And the reason you and I are talking right now is because this and fire and the wheel allowed us to do certain things that you couldn't before. Now, it's also a great multitasker, but to multitask to cut, now I'm not aligned. Now, a chef will hold a knife like this and not doing it perfectly right. But what they're doing is they're trying to align the muscular skeletal structure with the blade. But if you're cutting using the handle, all of a sudden you have to grip. All of your strength goes right here.
Right.
You're pushing down and you're transferring force across this. So you're losing it. You have to either saw or do whatever. This is what I would call a linear geometry: tip, blade, transition, handle.
Mm.
And like, for if you're going to the field, this is what you should, it can do more. But there's a knife called the ulu, and the ulu is an Inuit knife. And I had played around with making my own ulus, but then one day it hit me, what makes the ulu better, right? Everybody who goes to any service member that has gone to Alaska usually comes back with one, as does anyone who's gone on an Alaskan cruise. But it occurred to me that, well, wait a minute. If you were to design a machine that cut, you wouldn't design it like this. You would design it for efficient transfer. And an ulu provides efficient transfer because The control area is above the cutting area. It's like the center of a circle with a vector to somewhere on the circumference. What we did was we said, okay, if you take that conceptually and you think of this as the center of a circle, anywhere along this 160 degrees becomes somewhere where you're getting better muscular skeletal alignment with the blade. So you can see where if I'm cutting and I'm, imagine that this is a plate here. I can chop, I can slice, I can do a lot of things. And
Yeah.
if I have, let's say my wrist can't articulate, I can do it here too.
Yep.
Many knives you'll see out there, they'll either put a handle on it and it's a straight knife where it kind of looks like this. And all they're doing is putting a vertical handle on it, or you'll see rocker knives. We've integrated both of those into this kind of design. But what we figured out sort of mid-design was an ulu will typically have a pin here and open sides, or it'll be attached here and here, and it doesn't bring, this is where we're patent pending right now. If you reverse your grip, now there's a cleaving motion, and if you're doing precision cutting, now the cutting is right here.
Right there.
So
Wow.
you're able to cut this way. What was
Yeah.
interesting when I talked about the Abilities Expo was first the sight impaired people who we sold knives to. What we figured out was if you look, this is perfectly aligned with my body. Someone
Right.
who's sight impaired, me without my reading glasses, now you know exactly where the blade is. So if you're cutting, I have no
Oh, wow. Right.
ambiguity of where the blade is. The other thing is the people who were seated cutters, because of the heel blade, this person rolled up in a wheelchair and started cutting. I'm like, there's no right or wrong way to do it. So she picked it up and she started cutting backwards. And I do martial arts. I practice Aikido. And a lot of that is about efficient energy and force transfer. And I was watching her and I'm like, oh, she's bringing her core into it. So what she was doing was sort of rocking back as she was cutting.
Pulling
Her arm wasn't doing any of the work. So then I looked and went, oh, the other benefit of this is you don't have to grip it. So when you saw this and I'm gripping it, all my energy, as I was saying, goes here. My kinetic chain ends at the handle. My partner who does the design, the guy who designed it with me, is also our photographer. Guy is immensely gifted. And he gets mad at me because I cut like this. I barely hold it. All I'm doing is defying gravity because now I lose no force here. All this is a connection point to it makes my hand where the blade is, which gets back to my original question. If you were creating a machine, you would want it to work like a piston or in a manner like this that provided the right force transfer. So in some ways, this journey was kind of like my own. When you were talking about who am I and finding myself, we sort of had to find where this worked.
Right.
And one thing we did was because it no longer needs a tip, right? Its primary use is stabbing. That's the thing it is best for. We don't need a tip.
Wow.
So I can do this all day and I'm not going to cut myself. It doesn't feel great, but I'm not going to cut myself. And we wanted to make something that was optimized around the kitchen. And that's when we were talking a little bit earlier, that's what I found what keeps me going. And when I like helping people. I like being in the service of my fellow man and woman. And when I did that event and you would have a family there and usually the family were the caretakers in that case. And there might be I shouldn't say that. Sometimes there was maybe a parent or grandparent that had a stroke, but you saw there was an involved family.
Right.
But when I saw young people who had never used a knife and weren't included in food preparation, which all of us feel is mundane. You have people who literally subscribe to services to not be able to prepare food. But people who tried this, who had limitations, had an ear-to-ear grin when they were able to see or when they were able to experience what everybody else did. And that was
Wow.
something that was truly amazing.
And that's part of the this part great when I love to hear other people out there in the world, right, as being just going around being a human, right? You figuring out ways how to get it done. And like you said, you met people and you just gave them the knife. And then you just sat back and looked. He's like, man, I didn't even think of it using that way. It all, like you said earlier, it comes from lived experience, right? The innovation comes from lived experience. Like I can't tell you what I didn't experience. So I'm gonna give it to somebody who never seen it before. And they're gonna use it in a way I didn't even think of it before. So now that's part of the innovation.
It is. Well, and it's actually shaping where we're going because
Mm.
we've walked a tightrope of, is there a right way? And we've all been trained, right? There's got to be a right way of doing it. And as a result, you have to walk this tightrope of providing guidance and not. I'm going to date myself here, but I remember I had a Bowflex, right? I had a
Oh,
Bowflex
the
for a while,
Bowflex, yes.
and a Bowflex had a thing. It's like, here's recommended exercises, but one really brilliant aspect around that. And now I got the Chuck Norris Total Gym now. But one
Nice.
thing around those are because they're in many ways similar to my knife in that it's sort of open. Like if your body can move that way and it's not dangerous, you can invent new exercises. We're trying to kind of keep that open mind. Some of the martial arts I do, there is a concept of the beginner's mind to be able to grow, because if you feel you're a master of something and you can't re-engage the beginner's mind, you lose curiosity, which is what again helped us be on this today to invent all the things that make it possible. So
Hmm.
what we're actually doing now is betaing an AI tool that will allow a user or a potential user to provide the litany of their limitations. And we're not getting personal information, but to be able to say, okay, I've got tremor issues, I've got grip issues, I sit when I cut. And we're trying to take what I know and what my partners know and put it into an AI format where people can interact, ask it about a recipe. How can I cut all of the things for this recipe using this knife? How can I engage with my physician and articulate what this knife does to maybe have them help me get one reimbursed by insurance? Maybe there's a way to interact with a VA for disabled veterans who, would value an ability to own their nutrition the way I did, right? They're of the same
Wow,
tribe I
that's a
am.
good point. Right. That's a
So
good point.
we've now gotten to the point where we're trying to keep that flexibility, because you and I might both have upper extremity issues, but use it differently. And we might have different preferences. So we're actually trying to integrate some of that into it where people are able to stretch it to its full potential.
Wow. Stretch to your full potential. Stretch to your full potential. So I know that you openly talk about when you was diagnosed, right? You openly talk like, oh man, that's the reason why I've been able to do multitasker, right? About ADHD. So what has influenced your thinking on I need to share my story more so people know that you can operate with your disability? Like it's not a
Well,
disability, right?
and
It's your
what
ability
kills
to
me, I don't think it's a disability. I think
right,
if
it's a
you were to actually
superpower.
sample
Right,
a
it's a
lot of people out of the
superpower.
military. Well, you know what? And it's interesting. I had a conversation a couple days ago with a woman who's an ADHD coach, and she's an educator and has a lot more depth in it than I do. But there are actual theories that cognitively they were different sort of genetic things, where you had people who were better at the hunter gatherer aspect, and there were other people who sort of were better at ordering the society, and both were important. And as our world has become more and more sanitized and managed in a way like was the point where I said I was struggling, right? Big corporations, more rules, risk aversion, that kind of thing. Um, I realized that I hate it being approached as a disability, but I also try and keep in my mind that for some people it is crippling. But I think that's been created by society. But so when I was young, like I was probably textbook, right? Someone could have looked now and said, "Yeah, that kid." But I was fortunate in the school system I was in. They had a program that they shut down at some point, but that was built around learners like me. So, and it was considered gifted and talented back then, right? And I don't know if it was
Right.
euphemism. Maybe they would have said I was messed up, but um, it was never like you were broken. So when I got to West Point, I was like, "Holy crap! Like this is where I should be." Lots of requirements on your time, quick need to prioritize, right? I think that your definition of success when you have ADHD is different. Like I'd be like, "Hey, I got a B, great." And there were people who were like all A
Yeah.
students who got there. The first B they get, man, they're ready to to
Destruct.
uh,
Yeah.
to lose it.
Yeah.
So I and it's interesting because there's a circle to when you said, when we were talking about like finding who you are. Well, I looked and said, okay, the Army made sense. And I think when it hit me, my daughter, and she will agree to this, she will admit to this, she was a terrible cadet at the Coast Guard Academy for the first 2 years. And when she came home from fourth class to third class year, we sat down and I said, you need to decide what you're going to do. Because when you're going back and leading, you can't half ass this because other people's experience and development is dependent on it. And she's now rose to the occasion. But as part of that, I went back to my OERs, my officer evaluation reviews, and all of them said, this dude should be in the field. Like, he'll be terrible in garrison, but let him do it, right? And I was like, oh, I actually liked when I finally got to the field and I was, okay with the cold and whatever. When I got the adult diagnosis, I was like, oh, yeah, right. It totally made sense. But there's a wrinkle. So the VA were the one who gave me the diagnosis afterward because I'm like, I want to know. And
Right.
part of me was saying, I want to get medication for it if I can, because maybe that will help me better. I have a heart issue. I have a bad heart valve, and I've had open heart surgery to fix. I had an aneurysm, but they left the valve in because it was functioning fine. But they said you can't have ADHD medicine because they're stimulants,
Uh,
and while it's not going to hurt you, it'll put undue stress on your valve. So I had to stop and go, okay. And the guy who called me goes, but let me get this straight. You went to West Point. I graduated in the top third of my class. They're like, you went to the Army, you did okay. You got an MBA, you
yeah.
did this. He goes, doesn't really sound like you're having a big issue. And I'm like, yeah, man, I guess you're right. And that was about the time that all this came down. And that's when I was like, okay, I just have to know my limitations. Where it really hit me,
Uh,
and I owe this to my wife, she's like, you should be talking about this. And she and I went through an accelerator together for a different business because I'm like, you got to become an entrepreneur. It's the best thing ever. She doesn't love it as much as I do, but she saw my ADHD in action because usually she just got the life in the household where I'm like a Tasmanian devil zipping through the house. But then she saw it in action in a different environment and said,
right.
I get it now. And so then I started going to some of these communities, these online and stuff, and there's so many people broken that my feeling on it is, one, it's highly tied into the ability curve. Yes, you should look and say, these particular tasks I am terrible at and I would be disabled to do. But that's okay. Where am I a 10 versus a 5?
And go
I
that
should
route.
go to where I'm
Right.
a 10. So
Right.
I come up with this concept. I feel we're the children of chaos. We are a tribe that's wired the same way that our ambassadors to some degree, right? Like I was thinking I'm going to nerd out here, but let's like I was watching the Dune movies they just did, right? And they had these guys, everybody had their guys who do different things, right? Game of Thrones the same way. You had all your different people who were your advisors. Well, if you're not ADHD, sometimes it's good to have an ambassador like a Sherpa who can work in that environment and think quickly.
Yeah.
So for me, it is shifting the dialogue around um, thinking of it more as whether it's a superpower or a gift or something, and embracing of it. Because in some ways, I'm going to keep nerding out here. In some ways, it's like the X-Men movies, right, where they're always putting things on to suppress
Right.
their power, and most of them have a power that has a curse to it, right? Like it's always a duality, but to not allow them to have that power is a travesty. So that's kind
Mm.
of where I'm trying to get to, and part of it is the same way I was saying my talk on physical issues are for leaders and organizations. I want to talk to companies and leaders and other people and parents who have kids who have ADHD to say, the issue isn't whether they're performing or not, it's whether you're utilizing it, right? A football
Wow.
team is built like if you're a coach and you bring in a
Mhm.
franchise quarterback, you wanna know their skills, you're building the plays and the team around that.
Around them.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying the quarterback is always the guy who has the ADHD, the guy or girl. A lot of women now are being diagnosed where they weren't before, but it's an asset, right? You may have this whole team. You can look and say, "This is a guy I want doing this part of the job all the time," and I'll give them other things, and I know how to manage it to be able to do it where I know it's not intentional and deliberate sometimes when they're doing things. Many times when I'm on podcasts, I warn podcast hosts, "Hey, I have ADHD. I might interrupt you." That
Yeah.
that then gives them a license to do it, and
Right.
leaders need that same license to say, "Time out. You're going off on one of these things." So my whole team, none of them are like me, and they're pretty good at going, "Time out." But
Yeah.
they're also good at saying, "Where did you come up with that friggin' idea?" And they know that, it's like keeping a balloon or a kite on a string, right? You don't let that thing flying off. It's
Right.
not fun to fly it that way, but it can
Right.
do some.
No, and that's good. So I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, and somebody comes to you and they having a conversation, and you see some of the signs and symptoms that you felt. So what advice would you give somebody, and you see like, man, your mind works differently. What advice would you give them to embrace that? Because I'm
You
sure
just
that
gotta
you
have a
see people,
conversation kinda
you
and
just
see
have a
where
conversation.
where
Okay.
where it's going. I think I'm fortunate because I think, like, entrepreneurs tend to travel in the same groups, right? They tend to be in chambers of commerce and founders groups, and many of them are also high functioning people with ADHD. Um, I think where I'm finding them more now outside of that is in these groups where they're in roles that are soul crushing. Um, and it's hard. It's harder to identify it at that point because it might manifest as depression. I'm honest. Like when I was in the regular corporate world, uh, I had depression. Now that I'm not doing that, I am I'm much more calm in the midst of this chaos. And and the interesting thing is it is really perception. Corporate America now is no more, in my opinion, no more risky than being an entrepreneur. In many ways, you control your own destiny. Um, but for some people, having that degree of stability and just structurally the way our economy is set up, sometimes you have to do that for health benefits, for example. But I think that if they can find those roles and be able to articulate that, then it helps. Finding those people is hard. It's almost like finding, like the young vets right now who have a lot of trauma but aren't coming out and talking about it. And it's hard to find them because they don't join it. There's some similarities to that. So I'm hoping that if I can get momentum in my speaking stuff, that there's an ability to say, you should be seeking out people like me who actively talk about it. And I would never tell anybody, don't use medicine, do use medicine. I I had no choice. So for me, even if I was non-function or like low functioning, I wouldn't have the choice of any of the Adderall or any of that because that would wear my valve out faster. So
Right.
I'm in a unique position, but maybe there's something I can do, right? Like, when you talk about meditation, there might be a Zen priest, like a Zen
Mm,
master who's reached a level of meditation
right.
where I'll never get to, but I can still meditate to help myself. And I think some of that, I have engaged with people in some of these groups where I'm like, okay, if you're in a role where that's hard and you can't find that, find hobbies that will allow you the ability to feed that animal for a while. And for me, when I'm making knives, it's crazy. I'll be in my shop, I might be working on 3 of them at a time. It was never going to be a great career for me because I just don't have the ability to really produce beautiful knives at the rate that I would need to make a living at it. But as a hobby, it was great. There's
Right.
creativity, there's problem solving, there's all these things. I think a lot of what you're seeing manifest with people now
Mm,
is they're in consumptive hobbies. Anything here is consumptive. And
mm,
I think that the advice I give is go find things that are not that way. Hiking, even going out in nature and having a lot of stimulus, well, that would track with hunter gatherer, that kind of thing.
right.
That really helps. And there's ways to manage it, and there are ways that aren't that expensive. So I think if you can have that balance, again, I'm fortunate where I have it in my career and I have it
Mm,
in my life and my hobbies. But I will say there's a caveat. Part of the reason I recently just got back into training Aikido is because there's also the degree of providing lines to color in, where there is someone
mm,
who knows more than me who is setting the tone and how a class will be structured and what I need to do. And I think it's good to have that balance and recognize it, right? The army is great
mm.
because people like me, it's like the control alt delete.
Yeah.
Right? It's a new operating your BIOS is the ADHD, but they're
Right.
putting the right operating system above it, and things work well.
Right. And one thing we did talk about earlier too was that aging in play. You say, hey, if everything works out right, you get young, you start off as a baby, and then you go through life, right? Aging in place,
Yep.
design becoming, and how is that becoming more important now to have a conversation? Um,
Well, you know what? I think a couple of things.
mm,
The primary one is the cost of elder care is insane. So to any degree that you don't have to outsource things, the better. But there's so much now being talked about lifestyle driving how aging works, right? And there's kind of the two aspects. If there's lifespan and lifestyle, or however people talk about it, and you could live to be 90, but your quality of life might not be great. So I think a lot of aging in place is based on being your best self at the age that you are, but having the adaptive things in your home, whether they're devices and utensils or just how the house is laid out, so that you're able to continue living there. And people don't, and I think it's a newer thing, people don't like to think about it. But if you look sort of at history, until, I don't know, maybe it was into the 1950s or 60s, I would be lying if I knew, but I'm kind of trying to swag it. People had multi-generational households, and you might have a grandparent, a parent, and children, and there was much to be gained by that. And people could age in place because they were getting some help, but they were still being involved and all of that. And then we started outsourcing it 100%, or a large amount of it. I think culturally, in some cultures, it's still very, very multi-generational. And those are cultures that tend to have strong families. So I think it's just thinking the right way. I was actually on a podcast 2 weeks ago where the gentleman helps renovate for aging in place. And we had a dialogue about, like, if let's say you're my age and I'm in my 50s, and let's say I was going to do a bathroom remodel. Well, I would be crazy not to say, let's make everything in it handicap accessible, adaptive, or
right.
whatever, because if I do it now, one, if anything happens, I'm fine. Like if I have a stroke or
Mhm.
whatever, but otherwise I can age in place and not all of a sudden have to do all of those improvements at that time. But I think it's also a cognitive thing. It's saying, I'm not going to wait till I can't do a task to start thinking about ways that I can do that task better. That's where like my knife comes in. If you're in your 50s and 60s and you're just like, God, I don't cook as much. I don't want to use a knife. But you could, then it's actually the right point to start saying, wait a minute, do I need to let go of how I'm perceiving it and whether it's a kind of pejorative identification of being disabled and saying, okay, now I'm going to start buying the things that are easier to use. And as a result, it's sort of a snowball effect. When you start to find well-designed products, you'll buy more of them. And where I would love to see it go is that more companies would be saying, okay, we need to design smart, beautiful products that have an adaptive capability.
Wow, and that's part of leaving your legacy and the vision that you have for your companies. And that's I just want to say thank you for even taking the time out of life to say, man, where can I fill in the gaps at? Of innovation, right? Innovating a whole new knife. Right? This is like how many different ways you could make a knife. Well, hey, I got one. Have you
Well,
thought
and
about
it's funny.
this?
My partners and I were talking, and we had a comment on our website where someone came back and said, "Oh, so you just reinvented the Nulu or the Ulu? So big deal." And I'm like, "Okay." And we had someone else say something kind of similar, and I said, "Oh, it's like you can't invent a new knife." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. People say you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but the wheel has been reinvented a lot of different times. Fire or how you start it has been reinvented with cigar lighters and torch lighters and lighters with a bend on its right. So
Wow, yeah. I haven't
what
thought of it
bothers
like
me is
that.
the lack of imagination when those things happen, and I think it's sad when you hear someone say that to say realistically, and even if you talk to a patent attorney, there's very little that's new. Anytime you put in a patent, you have to refer to what's called prior art to say that, okay, I looked at what's out there and I feel my thing is novel. It is very rare that you're going to look and say, oh, this is completely out of the ether, has never been seen before, because there's just only so many combinations. What the invention is many times is, where is the innovation? So for us, it's this heel blade. It's thinking of it as a holistic thing where how are we maximizing efficiency? So that's where this goes back to, like, I've always wanted to be problem solving, right? Like that's how my brain works. And now when I've done that, like even when I got my shoulder done, I got it completely reconstructed. Around that time, I felt really vulnerable. Like, hey, if somebody came up on me, like, what am I going to do? So I wanted where do I hide a self-defense item? So I was playing around with that and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What if you could put items anywhere you want on it? So we designed this sling where you could put compartments and stuff anywhere you wanted, inside and out. We shelved that for a while, but it was another thing of like, okay, I'm not reinventing the sling. I'm optimizing the real estate on that sling for a
Mm,
use that solves other
optimization.
problems. And
That's
I think
good.
that's just where people have to think from innovation. And I had the honor of there's an incubator at my kids' high school, which is really cool. But I listen to some of these kids, and I'm happy that they're not cynical, because there's some great inventions, and these kids are doing some amazing things. And I think everybody has them. I think the veteran community, uh, and I've said this on other podcasts, aside from the disabled community who have to really solve problems with PVC and pool noodles and duct tape, veterans, active, whatever, military, my soldiers came up with solutions to stuff that were practical with whatever
Yes.
resources they had, right? And
That duct tape
um,
does a lot. That 100-mile-an-hour tape, hey, that thing does a lot.
well, you know what? It's funny. You could look at, I'm a gun enthusiast, and you could look at the AK-47. versus the M16 at the time that it was invented. M16 was invented by an aeronautical engineer. It's a very complex system, in my opinion, a lot of small parts. It's a great weapon system. The AK-47 was invented by a tanker. And they're very different applications, but you see that soldier practicality in the AK-47, where you look and say, that thing just works. And it was designed by someone who looks and says, well, what are my issues in the field? Serviceability, all these other things. So I really would love for more military guys to become inventors, because they know how to solve problems. And as I said, they work well in this environment. And a lot of them have a disability check coming, or retirement, or both, that I look at as a scholarship. It's an investment that you can either use to say, okay, I'm doing my thing, or do what I did and say, wow, you know what? I can keep the bills paid and really do this other stuff. And there's so many resources for veterans that, I always offer, hey, if anyone has any questions, reach out, because I found just the tip of the iceberg of those.
Wow. And you know what I found? The tip of the iceberg is some of the stuff that was said, on your website and stuff. So I pulled up some stuff I'm going to share with you to see if any of these sound familiar to you. Design should serve dignity.
Yes.
Curiosity drives invention.
Mm-hmm.
Different thinking leads to better solutions. Design should remove barriers. ADHD can fuel creativity. Resilience builds inventors. And human-centered design changes lives. What's your thought on those? What's the
I like
scoop on
that, man.
those, Doug?
And it's funny sometimes when you hear your own thinking back, but no,
Right.
and it's interesting, because a lot of that, I kind of work with AI like Jarvis, right? In Iron Man. And that's helped a lot to be able to articulate ideas and rein them in. And, it means a lot to me when people hear what I'm saying and it resonates, right? Like, there's times where, and that's the other thing I would say recently, because I do some writing on Substack, I do all that, is a lot of people are worried about what people will think. And boy, who gives a shit, right? Like, you think about what you and I did, right? Both of us were in the military. Both of us served. Both of us at one point were ready to take a bullet. And then you're worried about what people think, right? So there was a point where I just finally said, the hell with it. And that's when the tattoos went below the elbow. And I said, I'm now pretty much officially unemployable in corporate America, because I don't care what people think anymore. Like, I do, but not in a negative way. I don't care how I will be judged. I care what people think. I want people to understand what I'm doing and hopefully connect to it. But hey, if you don't like me, that's fine. Whatever, right? Like, you just got to get to where you're going, and I think that's for more people, we would be in a better place.
And that's huge. That's one thing I did struggle with before. Like, I remember I shared with you of the size I got to. I was
Dude, I was
very,
just going to say that. I was going to say that, right?
I was very like I faded. I faded off so everything. I faded off of everything, and then when I reemerged, people like, you know what they said? That they said, "Man, what happened to you? You used to be running. You used to be on doing all these marathons. What happened?" Man, life and you name it,
Mm-hmm.
PTSD, depression, anxiety, all this stuff that people don't see on the exterior is going on the interior.
Totally. Well, it's funny. I was fortunate to, like, when I mentioned my dad, when we moved to where I live now, we were deliberately having a multi-generational household. So we were looking for a first floor master suite. And I was fortunate enough to find this little community I live in, because I wanted a house with a workshop, which it had, and all that. And it was cool. I found out later it was a veteran. The guy who sold it to me, I knew of him. I kind of looked at his background and he passed away recently. And I looked at his bio and I'm like, holy crap, this guy he might have been at Fort Carson when I was there. But um, I was really fortunate to end up in a place both geographically, mentally, and all that aligned. I lost like 20 pounds right away. People from my old community that I lived in were like, "What are you doing?" Like, I don't think GLP-1s were big there, but they're like, "What are you doing to lose weight?" And I was like, "Nothing." And it was like the depression went away and all that. And you realize the mind body connection. And when you've got all that stuff together and you're dealing with um, high cortisol levels and all that kind of stuff, one, your habits get terrible, but you also, it has a physical effect. And I think there's a lot of people living that way right now.
Wow. So my one of my last ones before we start to transition into how do they get in touch with you. What does resilience mean to you? To Doug, what's the scoop on that? What does resilience? Because it means a lot of different
Right.
things to different people. What it means to you?
I think it means just keeping going, right? Like, not, it's interesting. Until you asked that, I didn't have an answer. I was going one way. And, my mind's a lot on Aikido these days because I'm getting back into it and really digging it. But and I'm at a different school, but the sensei who I trained under to get to up to second degree black belt, she would always say there's reaction to a problem and responding to a problem. And responding is different. And I think resilience is responding to a problem. I was gonna go down a thread of like, boy, when I was in the military, we were at the NTC one time, and vehicle got shot out from under me, and I grabbed radio and ran up the hill, and that
Right,
didn't happen. But that's really
right.
not it. And I'm kind of glad you asked it in the way you did because I think it is responding. Because most of the time, when you're not reacting and you're responding, there are solutions, there's pivots, there's redirections. There are all kinds of things that you can do when you're not reactive and you're not allowing the circumstances that you're facing to define what the course of action is. When you're responding to it, it's more, okay, what wasn't like I planned, right? What is when my plan hit the enemy, it no longer is my plan, and that being okay, but not allowing that to define it. And sometimes it's strategic retreat. So as an entrepreneur, sometimes like with the sling, it's saying, okay, it's the wrong timing. What we found out with that was that the way we were going, and we found out that there was actually more of a um, therapeutic application. We realized that we would get crushed. All the big manufacturers would crush us, and it was going to be very hard to get things recoded. So we stopped and said, "We've put a ton of work into this. Put it on the back burner. Let's get some of these other things to market." And it wasn't failure; it was the right response to then do other things. And I was less resilient years ago. Like, I think I was more so in the army, and then when you get to the more structured world, it was a little bit harder for me because there was less room to pivot, right? You're sort of stuck in a closet trying to make things work. And then when I became an entrepreneur, it was, wow, now I have room to maneuver. I can pick a different axis that I'm going to move along and things like that. And I think that's made me a lot more resilient. It's sometimes hard, right? Families asking, when are you going to start
Right.
selling enough these and all that? But but I think if you're able to respond to it, you can also articulate back to people, here's where we stand right now, and here's why we're doing it, and here's what our objectives are. And and I think that is where resilience comes in, or at least I think that's how you become resilient.
Wow.
um Resilience is in the outcome, and I think it's important for people to understand the activities and behaviors that will create that outcome.
Wow. And to create that outcome. So the saying goes, we do not know the day nor the hour that we will transition to the next life. What legacy do you want to leave behind once you're no longer on this side of the ground? What legacy do you want to leave?
You know, it's I love your questions, man, because I was thinking about, like, I'm not into graveyards. Like, I want to be either cremated, or now they're doing like the bury and put a tree on top and like tree
Right.
grows.
Yeah.
But it's this, right? Like, if I can grow this to what it will be, that's my epitaph. And
Man, that's awesome.
there's a podcast I listen to. I'm really big into all the Prof G podcasts. I just really connect with his messaging and the people that he works with. But he often talks about, like, it being the greatest thing to help people who you'll never benefit from, or never meet, right? The people who will be able to rest in the shade of the tree that you plant. And I would love someday for people to get on Wikipedia and find out who invented this thing. And, like, the legacy I want to give is why I invented it, but on a broader scale. And if that can also spark other people to do the same thing, and they can create the through line to it, then great. You know, we talked a little bit about my ADHD talk. And for the Children of Chaos, I created this sigil. Like, I'm really into this new Game of Thrones show, the Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Man, it's awesome. If you're
Okay.
not watching it, it's awesome.
It's on
I watched it
Netflix.
again with my son.
What platform is on? Amazon,
HBO.
Netflix,
It's
HBO.
on
Okay.
it's on HBO, but it's really cool. So I'm like, all right, I've created this Children of Chaos. I need a sigil, and it's a tree, and it's a tree that's in the symbol of chaos with roots. So, I would love for there to be a tree that from this, or from my inventions, other people pick up the torch and continue to do what I'm doing to try and make us all just better. And if that could happen, then, that's enlightenment, man. That's being able to leave the day that you leave feeling that you're okay with it. There's like a samurai ethos of live every day like it's your last, right? Where you just never know, right? The guy's walking around with swords all the time. And one day I was driving my car home, and I had what they thought was a TIA, right? I thought I was having a minor stroke, but I didn't know at that time. It could have been a major stroke because I lost my vision in my left eye. It ended up not being that. It was an eye stroke. Believe it or not, they have those. But I was like, all right, if this is a stroke, that could be it. And I remember coming home really calm, saying to my wife, "Hey, I lost vision in my left eye. What do you think?" And but I said I would be okay with it, right? Like, my
Right.
kids are good, and I've created something, and I've made a difference, even if I haven't followed it to fruition. So I think, like, if I'm that way now, and I can even do it further, like that will be a legacy I could be proud of.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And for our listeners and viewers and everybody that's going to come across this podcast, just knowing I'm looking directly into the camera. I shouldn't be here doing this podcast. They used to call me Stuttering Stanley when I was younger. Here I am, years later, doing this podcast with Doug. He came through his journey, and he has optimized the knife, and he wants to leave that for people to come and look at Wikipedia like, man, who optimized the knife? Who? Doug did. So if we could do it, we know you could do it. And Doug, how can they get in contact with you? Definitely the website where they can look at the knife, because I see that you have some great stuff out there, and also your other platform too. How can they reach out to you? How can they connect with you?
LinkedIn's always a good way. So I have business pages for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And there are other Douglas Katzes out there. There's actually a James Beard chef out of Cleveland, where I was born. So that's a kind of funny connection. But they can always go on any of the big platforms. And there are also Nulu pages for all of those. I have my own DouglasMCats.com website, where I'm working to get the speaking business going. But on there are links to Nulu, the AI beta that I've got out there that I would love for people to try and get me feedback on. My speaking, my talks. What else did I have on there? Oh, I've got another product that my wife and I are bringing to market. That's a bistro table for the back of golf carts. It sounds goofy, but
Nice.
galfresco.com totally makes sense. You down in Texas, you check that out because
Yeah.
it is
Okay.
it's an interesting product. That's sort of where we're scaling it. But my partner in that is a veteran too. So douglasmkatz.com, galfresco.com, nuluknives.com. All that stuff is out there. I have a pretty big digital footprint. And all roads kind of lead to that. If anybody has questions about one thing and they end up in one place, they can always reach out to me and mention how they're trying to get a hold of me and what for. And I'll tell you, if there's any listeners, we have an affiliate program. I love employing vets. If they can make that part of what they're doing, if they're dealing with issues and it's something they can scale, we work to support them in as much as we can with something like that. So it's a pretty good commission split and things like that.
Awesome. Well, hey, I thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh,
This
I
is
appreciate
like
it, man. I appreciate
this
the platform.
man, this conversation was so good. I can't wait to go back and listen to it multiple times because it's a lot of hidden gems in what we just talked about. A
I like
lot.
how you asked me about resilience and you showed me the pictures of when you were heavy and some of the things you went through. And I'm like, this guy's asking me about resilience. Like that's unbelievable. So, fantastic. I really, again, for me, I'm lucky that there's guys like you who are gutting it out in a really, really tough thing. Podcasting is tough, and giving me an ability to share my story. So I really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate that, Doug. And I second what you said is for me, like my legacy, I want to make sure that I give it all I have because once I transition, I don't want to ask myself, why did I leave it to myself when it could help others? You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
because I suffered a lot in silence.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be a hinge point or a barrier for somebody to suffer in silence when I know what it was like because I was there for years.
Right.
Years. And I just want to make sure I do my part so that person don't have to
Listen,
suffer in silence.
if your message is saving one person, I'm part of a veterans organization, and every year we do this field that recognizes veterans who have been killed in action from 1991 on. So basically, the global war on terror, and we have all the flags out there, and each one is tagged to an individual, and every year we'll have, people come out late night or whatever visiting and, sometimes that will be something that helps somebody out of their pit. Or there are some other organizations around here. There's one called Veterans Path to Hope, and the people that work with it have that same fire you do to say, if I can save one of these guys, and man, that's like, I would love to say, like, keeping people independent in the kitchen is great. Saving a life, that's amazing. So I think what you do with your listeners is as important, if not more, because some of these guys are looking and saying, this guy was able to pull out of it and I can too. So you may help people you never even knew you helped. And that's amazing.
I appreciate that. And before I go, so I think this is my first time I'm going to share the photo on the. So what Doug was talking about was this guy right here. This guy right here. This guy right here. And yes, I filled the whole pants. Filled the whole thing. The whole thing.
What I love is
you're
not done yet. When we were
no,
talking,
I'm not,
earlier,
no, I'm not done yet. I still have more to go, but I use that as a reminder to say, man, just keep going.
right?
Just make it to tomorrow. That's why I share this with everybody I come across and I speak to, and I tell them, man, just make it to tomorrow. Because when tomorrow comes, it turns into today. That's
Right.
it. Like I was on, like, man, let me look 5-10 years down. There's nothing wrong with looking for, but I need to look what's right in front of me. I need to make it to tomorrow. And then hopefully a lot of tomorrows will come together. You see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
I'm here a whole lot of tomorrows later.
Yeah. No, I love what you're doing, man. I love it. And it's interesting when you talk, there's almost a preacher aspect to it, and that is awesome, right? Like it is you're preaching good things to these guys. So I love it. I love it, man.
I appreciate it. And remember, everybody, you do not have to drown in the sea of transition. Grab that VET S.O.S Lifeline. We're here to help. And remember, everything is a transition. Tomorrow is a transition. Next week is a transition. So don't just think about, well, I mean, I'm transitioning. No, you go from one job to the next. That's a transition. You go from one invention to the next. That's a transition. You go
Totally.
from running shoes to walking shoes. That's a transition.
Dude, when I started doing Skechers, I'm like, okay. But I will tell you, I was actually thinking because it's spring right now and I never know what coat to wear, right? Like down where you're at, it's hot and hotter. But here we've had some really cold times and it's funny, right? You'll be outside and it's 50 degrees and you're in shorts and it's like even that seasonal transition. So I love that because I do think people get too comfortable and that's when change gets scary. But transition is great. Like transition could be bad, but transition is, we're going to start to see all the butterflies out and it's kind of cheesy,
Yes.
but right. But there's a transition to that. And people have to start looking on the positive side of it as whenever they can.
Yes. So remember, everybody, until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, pass it on to somebody else who wasn't here, that didn't listen, that didn't see it. Pass it on to them because they're going to get some value out of it. Until next time, everybody, take care. Peace.